In the sterile, unforgiving halls of Mercy General Hospital, silence was a luxury, and weakness was blood in the water. To the arrogant residents and the ambitious chief of trauma, Mattie Jensen was just the cripple, a middle-aged nurse with a heavy limp and a thick file of orthopedic shoes. They mocked her slow gait. They laughed at her silence. They tried to force her out, but they didn't know that the leg she dragged wasn't injured in a car accident or a fall. It was shattered in a valley in Kandahar while she was keeping their heroes alive. They were about to learn that you never judge a warrior by their scars. The sound was distinct. It wasn't the squeak of rubber soles on polished linoleum, nor was it the sharp clack of high heels. It was a rhythmic, uneven cadence that echoed through the trauma wing of Mercy General. Step, drag, step, drag. Mattie Jensen didn't look up as she pushed the medication cart down the hallway. She kept her eyes focused on the charts, her face a mask of practiced neutrality. She was 42, though the lines around her eyes and the silver threading through her dark hair made her look older. She wore her scrubs loose, and her left leg was encased in a thick, supportive brace that disappeared into a heavy, black orthopedic boot. "Here comes Hopalong," a voice whispered from the nurse's station. Mattie heard it. She always heard it. But she didn't flinch. She simply checked the dosage for the patient in room 304, a young man recovering from a motorcycle accident. "Be nice, Jessica," another voice chuckled, though there was no kindness in the tone. It was Dr. Brock Sterling, the newly appointed chief of trauma. He was young, brilliant, and possessed an ego that barely fit through the double doors of the emergency room. "She moves at her own pace. We can't all be built for speed." "Boah." "Speed saves lives, Doctor." "Jessica," the head charge nurse replied with a simpering smile, twirling a pen. "I'm just saying if there's a code blue at the other end of the ward, by the time Mattie gets there, the patient will be collecting a pension." Laughter rippled through the station. Mattie tightened her grip on the cart handle until her knuckles turned white, but she didn't stop. She turned into room 304, leaving the cruelty behind her. Inside the patient, a 19-year-old named Toby looked up. He was in pain, his leg elevated in traction. "You okay, Mattie?" Toby asked. He was one of the few who liked her. She was gentle with his dressing changes, and she knew exactly how to position pillows to relieve the pressure on his fractured femur without him having to ask. "I'm fine, Toby," Mattie said, her voice raspy, as if she didn't use it enough. "Time for your antibiotics. How's the pain scale?" "It's a 6, but it's better when you're on shift. The others, they just rush." "Rushing leads to mistakes," Mattie murmured, injecting the medication into his IV port. Her hands, unlike her legs, were steady. Rock steady. There was a precision to her movements that was almost mechanical. No wasted energy. Every motion had a purpose. As she worked, the intercom crackled. "Dr. Sterling to Trauma 1. Dr. Sterling to Trauma 1. Multiple GSWs inbound." GSWs. Gunshot wounds. Mattie finished with Toby and stepped back out into the hallway. The energy in the ER had shifted. Controlled chaos was descending. Dr. Sterling was barking orders, his white coat flying behind him as he strode toward the ambulance bay. Jessica was right on his heels, clipboard in hand. "Jensen," Sterling shouted without looking back. "We need hands. Get to Trauma 2 and try to get there before the patient bleeds out, will you?" Mattie didn't respond. She just moved. She shifted her weight, ignoring the grinding ache in her left femur, a souvenir from a jagged ridge in the Peck Valley, and forced her body into a faster rhythm. The limp became more pronounced, a violent lurch with every step. But she closed the distance. Trauma 2 was a mess. The patient was a victim of a drive-by shooting a male in his 30s with a bullet wound to the upper thigh. Arterial bleed. "Get pressure on that femoral, Dr. Reynolds," a second-year resident yelled, looking panicked. The blood was spurting in a high arc, coating the floor. Mattie was there instantly. She didn't wait for gloves. She grabbed a stack of trauma pads and leaned her entire body weight onto the man's groin, finding the pressure point with an instinct that bypassed conscious thought. "I need a tourniquet," Mattie said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the noise like a knife. "High and tight. Now." "We need to clamp it," Reynolds argued, fumbling with instruments. "You can't see the bleeder, doctor. Apply the tourniquet, or he dies in 30 seconds, Mattie commanded. Her eyes were coal-dark tunnels. Reynolds hesitated, stunned by the authority coming from the crippled nurse. But he saw the blood pooling. He grabbed the cat tourniquet and cinched it down where Mattie indicated. The bleeding slowed, then stopped. "Good," Mattie said, finally grabbing gloves from the wall dispenser with one hand while keeping pressure with the other. "Now get a line in. 2 large-bore IVs, 18 gauge. He's going into shock." Just then, Dr. Sterling walked in, having stabilized his patient in Trauma 1. He looked at the blood on the floor, then at Mattie. "Jensen, why aren't you scrubbed in properly?" Sterling snapped, seeing her bloody bare hands. "This is a sterile environment, not a butcher shop." "He was spraying arterial blood, doctor," Mattie said calmly, stepping back as the nurses took over the IVs. "Sterility doesn't matter to a corpse." Sterling's jaw tightened. He hated being corrected, especially by her. "Go get cleaned up." "So, I sent him Jensen." "Next time, follow protocol. If you infect my patient because you were too slow to put on gloves, I'll have your license." Mattie looked at him. For a split second, a flash of something dangerous appeared in her eyes, a look that had stared down things far more terrifying than an arrogant Ivy League doctor. But she blinked, and it was gone. "Yes, doctor," she said softly. She turned and limped away, the click-drag of her boot marking her retreat. The break room was empty, save for the humming of the refrigerator and the smell of stale coffee. Mattie sat on a plastic chair, her left leg extended straight out in front of her. She unstrapped the top Velcro of her heavy boot to relieve the pressure. The skin beneath her scrub pant was a map of scar tissue, purple and jagged, twisting around the metal rod that had replaced her shattered bone. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. The sound of the rotor blades, the smell of burning diesel and copper, the scream of "Medic, we need a medic!" echoing off the canyon walls. "Rough shift." Mattie snapped her eyes open. It was Dr. Halloway, the older anesthesiologist. He was a kind man, nearing retirement, and the only other person in the hospital who treated her with genuine respect. "Just the usual," Mattie said, refastening her boot quickly. She didn't like people seeing her vulnerability. "Sterling is riding you hard," Halloway observed, pouring himself a coffee. "He's a good surgeon, technically speaking, but he lacks perspective." "He's young," Mattie dismissed. "He thinks medicine is about being the smartest person in the room." "And you?" Halloway asked, leaning against the counter. "You never talk about where you learned to apply a tourniquet like that. I saw the footage from the camera in Trauma 2. That wasn't nursing school training, Mattie. That was muscle memory." Mattie stood up, testing her weight. "I worked in a busy ER in Chicago before this. You see a lot of things." It was the lie she always told. It was close enough to the truth to be believable, but vague enough to stop questions. She couldn't tell him the truth. She couldn't tell him that she had been a lieutenant in the Navy Nurse Corps, attached to a cultural support team that ran alongside SEALs and Rangers. She couldn't tell him that muscle memory came from trying to patch up boys who had been blown apart by IEDs in the dirt while taking fire from the ridges. That life was over. She had been medically discharged with a purple heart and a shattered leg that would never truly heal. Now she just wanted to do her job and go home to her empty apartment. She walked back out to the floor. The shift was dragging on. It was 2:00 a.m., the graveyard hour, where the city's worst nightmares usually rolled through the doors. Jessica was at the station whispering to a group of interns. As Matty approached, they fell silent, smirking. "Oh, look, she's back," Jessica said, loud enough to be heard. "Did you take a nap, Matty? We know it takes you a while to get moving." "Is the inventory done for the crash carts?" Matty asked, ignoring the jab. "I assigned that to you," Jessica said innocently. "Since you can't exactly run to codes, I figured you could handle the paperwork and stocking, better suited for your abilities." It was a demotion. Stocking crash carts was work for a first-year student, not a veteran nurse. "Fine," Matty said. She took the clipboard. She spent the next 3 hours systematically checking every crash cart in the ER. She was thorough. She checked expiration dates on epinephrine, ensured the laryngoscope blades had working batteries, and organized the drawers with obsessive precision. As she was finishing the cart near the ambulance bay, the red phone at the charge desk rang. It was the direct line from emergency dispatch. Jessica answered it, looking bored, but within seconds her face went pale. She stood up straight. "Say again." "How many?" Dr. Sterling was walking by, scrolling on his tablet. He stopped when he saw Jessica's face. "What is it?" Jessica hung up the phone. Her hands were shaking slightly. "Mass casualty event. A charter bus overturned on the interstate. Multiple critical injuries. They're estimating 30 victims. First transport is 5 minutes out." Sterling's arrogance vanished, replaced by the adrenaline of command. "All right, people. Listen up. We have a mass CAL inbound. Clear the trauma bays. I want every available nurse and doctor on the floor. Page the on-call surgeons. Move." The ER exploded into action. People were running, shouting orders, grabbing gurneys. Matty stood by the crash cart she had just stocked. She watched the panic rising in the eyes of the younger nurses. She saw Reynolds hyperventilating near the sink. "Matty!" Sterling shouted across the room. "Don't just stand there. We need space. Go move the non-criticals to the waiting room. Get them out of the beds." It was grunt work, ushering people out. But Matty nodded. "On it." She began moving patients, her limp heavy, but her pace relentless. She cleared 4 beds in 3 minutes. Then the doors burst open. The first wave of paramedics rushed in. Male 50s, crushing chest injury. Female 20s, open fracture, head trauma. The noise was deafening. Screams of pain, the beeping of monitors, the shouting of doctors. Matty was helping an elderly woman into a wheelchair when she saw it. A paramedic team was wheeling in a stretcher looking frantic. On the bed was a young girl, maybe 7 years old. She was grey, limp, and covered in blood. "We lost a pulse," the medic screamed. "She's coding. We need a room." Trauma. "One is full," Jessica shouted back, looking overwhelmed. "Trauma 2 is full. Put her in the hallway." "Doctor." Sterling was deep in a chest cavity in Trauma 1. There were no doctors available. The medics slammed the brakes on the stretcher in the middle of the hallway. One of them jumped up to start compressions. Matty looked around. No residents, no attendings. They were all swamped. The little girl was going to die in a hallway because of a lack of hands. Matty abandoned the wheelchair. She didn't limp this time. She surged forward, ignoring the fire shooting up her leg. She reached the stretcher. "Stop compressions, check rhythm," Matty barked. The medic looked at her. "Who are you?" "I'm the one saving this girl," Matty growled. She looked at the monitor. Ventricular fibrillation. Shock her. 4 joules per kilo. Charge to 100. "We need a doctor to authorize." "I said charge it," Matty roared. It was the voice of a commander, the voice that had ordered Marines into cover. The medic charged the paddles. "Clear." Thump. The girl's body arched. "Resume compressions," Matty ordered. She grabbed the ambubag. "I need an airway. She's not moving air." She tilted the girl's head. The throat was swollen, crushed by the seatbelt. "Airway is compromised. I can't intubate. We need a surgical airway." "Where is the doctor?" the medic yelled, looking around. Matty looked at Trauma 1. Sterling was yelling about a bleeder. He wasn't coming. "Hand me a scalpel," Matty said. "You're a nurse." Jessica appeared at her elbow, eyes wide. "You cannot perform a cricothyrotomy. It's illegal. You'll go to jail." "She has 2 minutes before brain death," Matty said, her hand held out. "Give me the damn scalpel, Jessica." "No, I won't be a party to this." Jessica backed away. Matty didn't hesitate. She reached into the trauma bag on the stretcher, ripped open a sterile kit, and grabbed a 10-blade. "Hold her head," Matty told the medic. With steady hands, Matty palpated the small neck, finding the cricothyroid membrane. It was difficult on a child, nearly impossible in a chaotic hallway. But Matty had done this in the back of a Black Hawk helicopter in turbulence. She made the incision. Blood welled up. She ignored it, feeling for the opening. She inserted the tube. "Bag her," Matty said. The medic squeezed the bag. The little girl's chest rose. "We have a pulse," the medic shouted. "Sinus rhythm returning. Sats are coming up." Matty exhaled, her shoulders slumping slightly. She taped the tube in place. Suddenly, a hand grabbed her shoulder and spun her around. It was Dr. Sterling. He had blood on his gown and fury in his eyes. "What do you think you are doing?" Sterling hissed, looking at the scalpel in her hand and the tube in the girl's neck. "Did you just cut into a patient without a physician present?" She was coding. Airway was crushed. Matty said, her voice flat. "She's alive." "I don't care," Sterling shouted loud enough for the entire hallway to hear. The chaos momentarily paused. "You are a nurse. You are not a surgeon. You are a liability with a bad leg, who just committed malpractice. Get out of my ER." "Doctor, she saved her." The medic tried to interject. "Get out." Sterling pointed to the exit doors. "You're suspended pending an investigation. Go home, Jensen. Before I have security, throw you out." Matty looked at him. She looked at the little girl whose chest was rising and falling rhythmically. She looked at Jessica, who was smirking in the corner. Matty untied her gown. She threw it in the biohazard bin. She didn't argue. She didn't beg. She simply straightened her back, turned, and began the long walk to the exit. Step, drag, step, drag. The sound echoed in the silence of the stunned ER. The silence in Matty's apartment was different from the silence in the hospital, at Mercy. General Silence was a predator waiting to pounce. Here in her small one-bedroom walk-up on the edge of the city, Silence was a heavy blanket. Matty sat on the edge of her worn beige sofa, her left leg elevated on 3 pillows. The prosthetic boot was off. Her leg throbbed with a dull, sickening rhythm, a reminder of the concrete floors she had pounded for 12 hours. But the physical pain was manageable. She had a high tolerance for agony. It was the shame that burned. She picked up the phone. She had to call her landlord. Without the shifts at the hospital, she wouldn't make rent next month. "I'm sorry, Mr. Henderson." She rehearsed the words in the empty room. "I've had a setback." She put the phone down. She couldn't do it. Not yet. Instead, she reached for the small wooden box kept on the bottom shelf of her bookcase, hidden behind a row of paperback thrillers. She opened the latch. Inside, resting on blue velvet, was a silver star and a purple heart. Beside them was a faded photograph of a younger Mattie, covered in dust, her arm draped around a massive bearded man in multicam gear. They were both smiling, but their eyes were old. She traced the face of the man in the photo. "I tried, Commander," she whispered. "I tried to keep my head down." Meanwhile, back at Mercy General, the narrative was being rewritten. The morning sun streamed into the plush corner office of Harlan Pendergast, the hospital administrator. He was a man who cared more about liability insurance and donor galas than patient outcomes. Sitting across from him was Dr. Brock Sterling, looking fresh-shaven and utterly composed. "It's a tragedy, really," Sterling said, leaning back in the leather chair, swirling a cup of espresso. "Jensen has always been unstable. I've tried to mentor her. I've tried to be patient with her, limitations. But for her to perform a surgical airway on a pediatric patient, it's criminal reckless conduct." Pendergast wiped sweat from his forehead. "But the girl, the Davidson girl, she survived because I arrived seconds later to stabilize the airway and manage the post-procedure trauma." Sterling lied smoothly. He didn't blink. "Jensen panicked. She hacked at the throat. I had to clean up the mess. If I hadn't stepped in, the parents would be suing us for wrongful death right now." Pendergast nodded rapidly. He wanted to believe this. Firing a rogue nurse was easy. Admitting the hospital was understaffed and a nurse had to do a doctor's job was a PR nightmare. "The parents are outside," Pendergast said. "The Davidsons. They want to thank the doctor who saved their daughter." Sterling stood up, buttoning his white coat. He checked his reflection in the glass cabinet. "I'll handle them. It's better if they don't know a deranged nurse almost killed their child." Sterling walked out to the waiting room. The Davidsons were a wealthy couple, well known in the city's social circles. Mrs. Davidson was weeping softly, holding a tissue. Mr. Davidson, a tall man in a tailored suit, looked up as Sterling approached. "Dr. Sterling?" Mr. Davidson asked, extending a hand. "They told us you were the one." Sterling took the hand, his grip firm, his smile practiced. "I was the attending physician, yes. It was a chaotic situation. Your daughter is a fighter." "The paramedics, they said someone performed a miracle in the hallway," Mrs. Davidson said, grabbing Sterling's hand. "They said her throat was crushed, that you cut her open to let her breathe." Sterling's smile didn't waver, but his eyes hardened slightly. "We do what we have to do. It was a difficult call, but I couldn't let her go." "Thank you," she sobbed. "Thank you for saving my Lily." Sterling accepted the gratitude. He accepted the hugs. He accepted the promise of a substantial donation to the trauma wing. He felt no guilt. In his mind, he was the hero. Mattie was just a tool, a malfunctioning instrument that he had finally discarded. Later that afternoon, Jessica found Sterling in the break room. "You told them you did the crick," she asked, raising an eyebrow. She didn't look disapproving. She looked impressed by his audacity. "I'm the chief of trauma, Jessica. Everything that happens on that floor is my responsibility. Therefore, I did it," Sterling said, taking a bite of a bagel. "Besides, who are they going to believe, the Ivy League surgeon or the limping spinster who lives in a studio apartment?" "She's cleaning out her locker tomorrow," Jessica said with a smirk. "Security is escorting her. I can't wait to see her waddle out of here for good." "Good riddance," Sterling muttered. "She was an eyesore." They didn't know that the gears of fate were already turning. They didn't know that a phone call had been made from the secure line of a base in Virginia Beach, a call triggered by a facial recognition hit on a hospital security camera feed that had been flagged by a federal agency monitoring veteran status. The predator wasn't the silence in Matty's apartment. The predator was coming up the interstate in a convoy of black SUVs. 2 days later. The atmosphere at Mercy General was tense. The incident with the nurse had become the subject of hushed gossip. Most of the staff believed Sterling's version of events, that Matty had snapped and nearly killed a kid. The few who knew the truth, like the paramedic who had been there, were too afraid of Sterling to speak up. Matty arrived at 10:00 a.m. She wasn't wearing scrubs. She wore a pair of dark jeans and a simple grey sweater. She walked with her cane today, the pain in her leg flaring up due to the stress. She stopped at the security desk. "I'm here to clear out my locker," she told the guard, a man named Frank, who had always been kind to her. He couldn't meet her eyes. "I have to escort you, Matty. Orders from Pendergast," Frank mumbled. "I understand, Frank. Let's get it over with." They walked the long hallway to the locker room. As they passed the trauma bay, she saw Sterling and Jessica laughing near the nurse's station. They went quiet as she passed. "Don't forget your orthopedic inserts, Matty," Jessica called out, her voice sickly sweet. "Wouldn't want you to trip on your way to the unemployment line." Matty stopped. She turned slowly. For the first time, she didn't look down. She looked Jessica straight in the eye. "Be careful, Jessica," Matty said softly. "The floor is slippery when you stand in that much slime." Jessica gasped, offending, but before she could retort, the ground seemed to vibrate. It started as a low rumble felt in the chest more than heard. Then the sound of heavy engines filled the air outside the glass sliding doors of the main entrance. Heads turned. Patients in the waiting room stood up. Through the glass, 3 massive black SUVs with government plates screeched to a halt in the ambulance bay, blocking the entrance. The doors flew open in perfect synchronization. 6 men stepped out. They were giants. They wore tactical civilian clothing, cargo pants, tight t-shirts that strained against muscle and Oakley sunglasses. They moved with a fluidity that screamed violence held in check. But it was the man who stepped out of the lead vehicle who commanded the air. He was wearing a formal Navy service dress blue uniform, immaculate and sharp. The gold stripes on his sleeve identified him as a captain, a high-ranking officer equivalent to a full colonel in the army. His chest was heavy with ribbons. The trident pin, the Budweiser, gleamed gold above his left pocket. He took off his sunglasses. His face was scarred, rugged, and terrified. Absolutely no one, because he looked like a man who had made peace with death years ago. This was Captain James Riker, commanding officer of a Tier 1 operator unit. The automatic doors hissed open. The 6 men in tactical gear entered first, fanning out to secure the perimeter of the lobby. They didn't draw weapons, but their hands hovered near their waistbands. The hospital security guards froze. Frank put his hand on his radio, but didn't dare speak. Captain Riker marched into the center of the lobby. His boots on the tile sounded like hammer strikes. Administrator Pendergast came running out of his office, his tie flapping. Dr. Sterling followed, looking annoyed at the disruption. Excuse me, Pendergast squeaked. You can't just park there. This is an emergency vehicle zone. Who are you? Captain Riker ignored Pendergast completely. He scanned the room, his eyes like laser sights. I am looking for the Chief of Trauma, Riker boomed. His voice was a deep baritone that carried to the back of the cafeteria. Sterling straightened his coat. He stepped forward, a smug smile playing on his lips. He assumed this was a VIP visit. Perhaps a senator had been injured, or a general needed discreet surgery. This was his moment. I am Dr. Brock Sterling, Chief of Trauma, Sterling announced, extending his hand. How can I assist the United States Navy? Riker looked at Sterling's hand, then at his face. He didn't shake it. You're the one in charge of the floor, Riker asked. I am, Sterling said, dropping his hand, slightly irritated. I run this department. Good, Riker said. Then you can explain to me why the woman who saved the life of my goddaughter is currently being escorted out by security like a criminal. The room went dead silent. Sterling blinked. I beg your pardon, my goddaughter. Riker repeated his voice, dropping an octave, becoming dangerous. Lily Davidson. Her father is my former platoon commander. I just got off the phone with him. He told me the hospital claims you saved her. Sterling paled. Well, yes, it was a complex procedure. Complex procedure, Riker interrupted. A cricothyrotomy performed with a number 10 blade in under 30 seconds on a pediatric patient in a hallway. That's not a medical school procedure, doctor. That is a battlefield modification. That is a preventable death protocol taught in only a few places on Earth. Riker took a step closer to Sterling. The doctor shrank back. I pulled the security footage from your servers 10 minutes ago, Riker said. We have high-level clearance. I watched the video. Pendergast looked like he was going to vomit. You hacked our servers. We monitored them, Riker corrected, and I saw a man in a white coat standing in Trauma 1 while a little girl died, and I saw a woman with a bad leg step in and do the work of God. Riker turned away from Sterling, dismissing him as if he were an insect. He scanned the crowd again. Where is she? Riker shouted. Where is the Wraith? The staff looked confused. The Wraith, someone whispered. We don't have anyone by that name, Pendergast stammered. We only have... Well, we fired Nurse Jensen. Riker's eyes snapped to the hallway, where Mattie was standing frozen, clutching her cane. The terrifying captain's face softened. The mask of command crumbled for a split second, revealing profound relief. Attention on deck, Riker shouted. Instantly, the 6 massive men in tactical gear snapped to attention. Their heels clicked together. They stood rigid as stone statues. Riker walked toward Mattie. He didn't walk like a VIP. He walked like a soldier approaching a shrine. Sterling watched his mouth open. What are you doing? She's just a nurse. She's a cripple. Riker stopped. He spun around so fast that Sterling flinched. A cripple. Riker spat the word out. You think she limps because she's weak? She limps because she took a 7.62 round through the femur while dragging me 300 yards down a mountain in the Korangol Valley. A gasp rippled through the lobby. Jessica covered her mouth. Riker turned back to Mattie. He stopped 3 feet in front of her. Mattie was trembling. She hadn't been looked at like this in 10 years. She hadn't been seen. Hello, Mattie, Riker said softly. Hello, Jamie, she whispered. Captain Riker, a man who commanded SEAL teams, a man who had medals that couldn't be listed on public records, slowly raised his right hand. He saluted her. It wasn't a quick salute. It was a slow-held, respectful salute. A salute reserved for superiors. A salute reserved for legends. "Lieutenant Commander," Riker said formally. "It's been a long time." The lobby of Mercy General was paralyzed. The only sound was the hum of the vending machines and the heavy breathing of Dr. Sterling, who looked as though he was experiencing a cardiac event. "Lieutenant Commander," Jessica whispered to the nurse next to her. "Matty is an officer." Riker held the salute for a full 10 seconds before dropping his hand. He gestured to the men behind him. "You remember the boys, don't you, ma'am?" Riker asked. The 6 men stepped forward. They weren't just soldiers, they were the elite. And one by one, they approached Matty. The first one, a bearded giant with a scar running down his cheek, took Matty's hand gently. "You put my intestines back inside my stomach in 14. Ma'am," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I have 3 kids now, named the youngest one Matilda." The second man stepped up. "You stayed awake for 72 hours straight, keeping pressure on my femoral artery when the medevac couldn't land in the storm. I never got to say thank you." Tears streamed down Matty's face. She let go of her cane, but she didn't fall. The first soldier caught her arm, steadying her. "I was just doing my job," Matty choked out. "No," Riker said, his voice carrying to the entire room. He turned to face the hospital staff, ensuring everyone heard. "Let me tell you who this woman is, because clearly you idiots have no idea." Riker pointed at Matty. "This is Lieutenant Commander Matilda Jensen, Navy Nurse Corps, attached to JSOC. She didn't work in a comfortable hospital. She volunteered for the cultural support teams. She went where we went. She kicked down doors with us. And when the ambush happened in the Pesh Valley, the one where we were outnumbered 40-1, she didn't hide." Riker walked over to Dr. Sterling, getting right in his face. Sterling was backed against the reception desk. "We took heavy fire." Riker recounted, his eyes burning into Sterling. "I took 2 rounds to the chest plate and 1 to the leg. I couldn't move. We were pinned down. The enemy was closing in. And then I see Matty. She didn't have a weapon. She had a medical bag." Riker gestured to Matty's leg. "She ran into the kill zone. Not once, not twice, 6 times. She dragged 6 wounded SEALs out of the line of fire. On the last run, a sniper shattered her leg. Did she stop? No. She crawled. She crawled through the dirt, dragging a 200-pound operator while bleeding out herself. She refused evac until every single one of my men was on the bird. She is the only reason I am standing here. She is the only reason any of us are breathing." Riker turned to Pendergast. "We call her the Wraith because she moved through the battlefield like a ghost, saving lives where no one else could. And you," Riker looked at Sterling with pure disgust, "you mocked her limp. You fired her for saving a child, using the very skills she paid for, with her own blood." Sterling tried to speak. "I didn't know. Her file, it just said Navy nurse." "Because her file is redacted, you moron," Riker snapped. "Because she is a humble professional who doesn't brag about being a hero, unlike some people." Riker reached into his pocket and pulled out a phone. He held it up. "Mr. Pendergast, I have the Secretary of the Navy on the line, and the Davidsons. They are very interested to hear why a recipient of the Navy crossed the 2nd highest award for valor in this country was fired for saving a life." Pendergast's knees actually buckled. He grabbed the desk for support. Navy Cross. Dr. Sterling, Pendergast choked out. You said she was incompetent. She is, Sterling shouted, desperate, now his ego fighting for survival. She violated protocol. She's a nurse. I am the surgeon here. I bring in the money. I am the face of this trauma center. Not anymore, a new voice cut in. It was Mr. Davidson. He had walked in from the waiting room, having heard the commotion. He stood next to Captain Riker. I am on the board of directors for this hospital, Mr. Davidson said, his voice ice cold. I just heard everything. Dr. Sterling, you lied to my face. You stole the credit for saving my daughter, and you denigrated a war hero. Mr. Davidson, please, Sterling pleaded. It was a misunderstanding. You're fired, Davidson said. Effective immediately. Get your things and get out, and I will be reporting you to the medical board for falsifying patient records. You'll never practice medicine in this state again. Sterling looked around. The nurses were staring at him with hate. Jessica had quietly slipped away, disappearing into the back office. The security guard, Frank, was grinning. Sterling stripped off his white coat. He threw it on the floor. He tried to muster some dignity, but as he walked past the line of Navy SEALs, he looked small, pathetic. He hurried out the sliding doors, the sound of his expensive shoes clicking away into oblivion. Riker turned back to Matty. The anger vanished from his face, replaced by warmth. Ma'am, Riker said, the Navy has a program for training combat medics, advanced trauma management. We need an instructor, someone who has been there, someone who knows that the book doesn't always apply when the bullets are flying. Matty wiped her eyes. Jamie, I can't run anymore. I can't keep up with the recruits. We don't need you to run, Matty. Riker smiled. We need you to teach them how to stand. We need you to teach them how to be you. He extended his hand. The pay is triple what this place gives you. Full benefits. And you'll never have to stock a crash cart again. You'll be training the next generation of heroes. What do you say? Matty looked at the hospital walls, the place that had treated her like furniture. Then she looked at the brothers she had saved. She looked at her leg, the source of her shame now revealed as the badge of her honor. She straightened her back. She took a deep breath, and for the first time in years, the phantom pain in her leg vanished. I say. Matty smiled, taking Riker's hand. Let's go to work. As she walked out of the hospital, flanked by 6 Navy SEALs, the entire ER, staff nurses, doctors, orderlies, and patients broke into applause. It started slow, then grew into a roar. Matty Jensen didn't limp as she walked to the black SUV. She marched. The victory in the hospital lobby felt definitive, but wars, whether fought in the jagged valleys of Afghanistan or the polished boardrooms of modern medicine, rarely end with a single battle. There is always an aftermath. There is always the debris to clear. For Matty Jensen, the silence that followed her vindication was not peaceful. It was heavy with impending thunder. 2 weeks had passed since Captain Riker and his team had extracted her from Mercy General. She had resigned officially, but the transition to her new life at the naval base wasn't as simple as signing a contract. Dr. Brock Sterling, humiliated and stripped of his position, was not a man who went down quietly. Like a cornered rat, he lashed out with the only weapon he had left: bureaucracy. Matty sat in the small living room of her apartment, surrounded by half-packed boxes. The letter lay on her coffee table, the header embossed with the seal of the State Medical Board. Subject notice of emergency hearing. Revocation of nursing license. Complainant Dr. Brock Sterling. Allegation, gross negligence. Practicing medicine without a license, narcotic diversion. "He's accusing me of stealing drugs," Mattie asked, her voice trembling with a rage she hadn't felt since the Korangol. Captain Riker stood by her window looking out at the rainy street. He was out of uniform today, wearing jeans and a flannel shirt, but he still occupied the room like a tank. "He's desperate, Mattie," Riker said, turning to face her. "He knows he's finished. He's trying to burn the house down on his way out. He claims your erratic behavior and the cricothyrotomy were results of an opioid addiction stemming from your leg injury. He wants to strip your license so you can't work for us." "I'm clean," Mattie said sharply. "I haven't taken a painkiller in 4 years. I manage the pain with ice and grit." "We know that. The Navy knows that," Riker assured her. "But the State Board is civilian. They have to investigate. The hearing is tomorrow. We have JAG lawyers ready to crush him, but I have to be there," Mattie finished. She looked at her leg. "I have to stand in front of them and defend my life again." Riker walked over and knelt on one knee, bringing himself to her eye level. "You don't have to do it alone this time. The boys wanted to come, but I told them a courtroom isn't the place for a platoon. But I'll be there. I'm your character witness." The hearing took place in a sterile, windowless conference room in the state capitol. The air conditioning was humming too loudly, a droning sound that reminded Mattie of the transport planes. 5 board members sat behind a long oak table. They looked tired and skeptical. At the other table sat Dr. Sterling. He looked haggard, his eyes rimmed with red, but his suit was still expensive, and his sneer was still in place. Next to him was a high-priced attorney who looked like a shark in a pinstripe suit. "Ms. Jensen," the board chairwoman, a stern woman named Dr. Galloway, began. "We are here to address serious allegations, Dr. Sterling claims you performed an invasive surgical procedure on a pediatric patient without authorization, and that you did so while potentially impaired." "I saved a life," Mattie said, her voice steady, though her hands were gripping the arms of her chair. "By breaking the law," Sterling interrupted, his voice shrill. "She's a nurse. She cut a child's throat. If I hadn't been there to fix it." "Objection." The Navy JAG officer representing Mattie stood up. "Dr. Sterling is testifying to facts that have already been disproven by hospital security footage." "Footage can be manipulated," Sterling snapped. "This woman is unstable. Look at her. She's a cripple who thinks she's a hero. She uses her war injury to get sympathy while she endangers patients." Mattie felt the room spinning slightly. The word cripple hit her like a physical blow. It brought back the memory of the explosion, the white-hot flash, the feeling of her bones snapping, the smell of her own burning flesh. Riker, sitting in the gallery, started to stand up, his face darkening with fury. Mattie raised a hand to stop him. She didn't need a SEAL captain to fight this battle. She took a deep breath, pushing the pain into a small, tight box in her mind. She stood up. She grabbed her cane, but then in a moment of defiance, she leaned it against the table. She stood on her own 2 feet, swaying slightly as the damaged nerves in her left leg fired warning signals. "Dr. Galloway," Mattie said, her voice projecting to the back of the room. "Dr. Sterling calls me unstable. He calls me a cripple. He claims I was on drugs." She reached into her purse and pulled out a thick file. She tossed it onto the table in front of the board members. "That is 10 years of random drug screenings from the Veterans Affairs Administration, all clean, not a single failed test, not even for aspirin." She pulled out another document. "This is the sworn affidavit from the paramedic on the scene, stating clearly that Dr. Sterling was not present when the airway was established. Matty took a step toward Sterling. He flinched. And as for being a cripple, Matty said, her voice dropping to a terrifying whisper, my leg was shattered while I was carrying a 220-pound man through a minefield. I walked on a broken femur for 3 miles because there was no one else to carry the medical bag. I don't limp because I'm weak, doctor. I limp because I didn't quit. She turned to the board. You can take my license. You can take my title. But you cannot take the fact that a 7-year-old girl is eating breakfast with her parents this morning because I acted when this man froze. The room was silent. Dr. Galloway picked up the drug test records. She looked at them. Then she looked at Sterling. Dr. Sterling, Galloway said, her eyes narrowing. Did you file this complaint knowing that Miss Jensen had a clean toxicology record? I suspected, Sterling stammered. And are you aware? Galloway continued, picking up a piece of paper the Navy lawyer had slid to her earlier. That we have received a counter-report from the hospital administration regarding your own falsification of records. Sterling's face went grey. The board is dismissing all charges against Miss Jensen. Galloway slammed her gavel down. Furthermore, Dr. Sterling, you are hereby notified that your license is suspended, pending a full inquiry into your conduct and ethics. This hearing is adjourned. Sterling slumped in his chair, defeated. He didn't look at Matty. He stared at the table, realizing that his arrogance had finally cost him everything. Matty picked up her cane. She felt lighter. The phantom weight of Mercy General was finally gone. Riker met her at the door. He didn't say a word. He just offered her a smile, a genuine, proud smile, and held the door open. Ready to go home, Commander? He asked. No, Matty said, looking out at the sun breaking through the clouds. I'm ready to go to work. 6 months later. The wind whipped across the sand dunes of the Joint Expeditionary Base, Little Creek Fort story. It was a miserable grey morning, the kind of weather that seeped into your bones and made old injuries scream. Matty stood on a raised observation platform, looking down into the Grinder, a muddy, chaotic obstacle course designed to simulate the worst conditions of combat medicine. Below her, 20 candidates for the Special Amphibious Reconnaissance Corpsman SARC program were struggling. They were wet, cold, and exhausted. They had been awake for 40 hours. Matty wore fatigues now, a navy cap pulled low over her eyes. She leaned on her cane, but no one dared to mock it. Here the cane was a scepter of authority. They're moving too slow, Matty muttered into her headset. Next to her, Chief Petty Officer Gunny Hayes, a massive instructor with a shaved head, nodded. They're dragging, ma'am. Blue team is falling apart. Drop a simulation grenade, Matty ordered. Wake them up. Boom. A flash bang detonated near the mud pit. The recruits scrambled, shouting orders. Medic man down, massive hemorrhage. A simulated casualty screamed. Matty watched through her binoculars. She focused on a young candidate, a 19-year-old named Kowalski. He was the class leader, smart, athletic, and arrogant. He reminded her painfully of a young Dr. Sterling, though with more muscle and less diploma. Kowalski was hesitating. He was staring at the dummy casualty, which was pumping fake blood from a femoral artery. He's freezing, Matty said. He's looking for the book answer. She keyed the mic. Kowalski. Your patient has bled out 2 liters. Why are you staring at him? Pack the wound. Ma'am, the wound is too high for a tourniquet, Kowalski shouted back, his voice cracking with panic. I need to clamp. You don't have a clamp, Matty yelled. Use your knee manual pressure. Get in the fight, Kowalski. Kowalski fumbled. He was afraid to get dirty. He was afraid to make a mistake. Mattie sighed. She handed her coffee to Hayes. "I'm going down there." "Ma'am, the mud is deep," Hayes warned. "Your leg." "My leg is fine, Chief. My patience is what's broken." Mattie descended the ladder. She moved with her distinct gait, step drag, but she moved with speed. She walked right into the mud pit, ignoring the grime splashing onto her boots. She reached Kowalski, who was still panicking over the dummy. "Move," Mattie said calmly. "Ma'am, I can't find the artery," Kowalski yelled. Mattie dropped her cane. She fell to her knees in the mud. She shoved Kowalski aside with a strength that surprised him. She jammed her fist into the groin of the dummy, finding the pressure point instantly. The flow of fake blood stopped. "You don't look with your eyes, Kowalski," Mattie said, her voice cutting through the wind. "You look with your hands. You feel the life leaving them, and you hold it in. You are the dam. Do you understand me?" Kowalski stared at her. He saw the older woman covered in mud, her face splashed with the red dye of the simulation. He saw the intensity in her eyes. "Yes, ma'am," Kowalski whispered. "Then get in here," Mattie ordered, grabbing his hand and forcing it into the wound cavity. "Feel that. That's the bone. Push against it. Harder. If you aren't hurting him, you aren't saving him." Kowalski pushed. He gritted his teeth. "Good," Mattie said. She stood up, retrieving her cane from the muck. "Now finish the dressing. You have 30 seconds. She watched him work. He was faster now, focused. He had stopped thinking about the protocol and started thinking about the survival. Later that afternoon, the class was dismissed to the showers. Mattie sat in the instructor's office, cleaning the mud off her brace. There was a knock on the door. It was Captain Riker. "Heard you went for a swim in the mud pit." Riker grinned, leaning against the door frame. "You know, usually officers stay on the catwalk." "They needed a reality check," Mattie said, wiping a spot of mud from her cheek. "Kowalski. He's got good hands, but he's afraid to fail. You can't be afraid to fail in this job." "He reminds you of someone?" Riker asked knowingly. "A little," Mattie admitted. "But he's got heart. Sterling didn't have a heart." "Speaking of Sterling," Riker said, his expression turning serious, "I got a call from the Davidson family. They're establishing a scholarship fund at the medical college, the Matilda Jensen Trauma Nursing Scholarship. Full ride for nurses who want to specialize in combat trauma." Mattie paused. She looked at the photo on her desk, the one of her and Riker in Kandahar, now joined by a new photo of her graduating class of corpsmen. "They shouldn't have named it after me," she said softly. "I was just doing my job." "Mattie," Riker said, stepping into the room, "you need to stop saying that. You aren't just doing a job. You're a legend. The recruits, they call you the Wraith behind your back." Mattie rolled her eyes. "I hate that name." "They don't mean it like a ghost," Riker explained. "They mean it because you see things no one else sees. You appear where you're needed, and death seems to retreat when you're around." He pointed out the window where the recruits were marching to the mess hall. "Look at them. They walk taller because you're the one teaching them. You're fixing them, Mattie. Just like you fixed us." Mattie stood up. She tested her weight on her leg. It still hurt. It would always hurt. The metal rod, the screws, the scars, they were a part of her geography now. But the shame was gone. The limp wasn't a defect. It was a cadence. It was the rhythm of a life that had refused to stop moving forward. She walked over to the window and watched the young men and women marching in formation. She saw Kowalski laughing with his teammates, his confidence restored. "I'm not fixing them, Jamie," Mattie said, a small, genuine smile touching her lips. "I'm just making sure they come home." She turned off the office light. She grabbed her cane. "Come on," she said to Riker. "I'm buying the first round, but if you make a short joke, you're doing 50 push-ups." Riker laughed, a deep, booming sound. "Deal, Commander. Deal." They walked out together into the cool Virginia evening, two warriors, one limping, one marching, both finally at peace. The hospital was a distant memory. The mockery was dust in the wind. Mattie Jensen was exactly where she belonged on the line, guarding the door between life and death. Mattie Jensen's story reminds us that true heroism isn't about the uniform you wear or the title on your badge. It's about the courage to act when everyone else freezes. Dr. Sterling looked at Mattie and saw a broken woman with a limp, but he failed to see the steel spine of a warrior who had walked through hell to bring her brothers home. The world is full of people who will judge you by your scars, who will mistake your silence for weakness and your kindness for fragility. Don't let them define you. Your scars are your medals. Your struggles are your strength. If you believe that we should never judge a book by its cover, and that our veterans deserve endless respect for the silent battles they fight, every day, hit that like button. Share this story to honor the nurses and medics who save lives in the shadows. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story about real-life heroes who prove the doubters wrong.